This is Zero Signal, where security leaders stop waiting for certainty and start leading through it. I'm Conor Sherman.
And I'm Stuart Mitchell.
Let's get into it. Zero Signal is brought to you by Sysdig. Threat actors are compromising cloud accounts in under 8 minutes. Vulnerabilities are being exploited within 10 hours of disclosure. That's the defender's window, and it keeps closing. Attackers aren't waiting on dashboards. They go straight for what's running. Real time is the only timeline that matters. And that's why Forrester named Sysdig a leader in its latest wave for the cloud-native application protection platforms. Runtime is where real risk shows up, and runtime is what Sysdig is built for. So stop watching and start defending. Learn more at sysdig.com and check out the link in the description. Zero Signal is brought to you by RiskPoint. When the mission is on the line, you don't want a vendor. You want to work with people who've actually been there. I've worked with RiskPoint directly. Together, we took an organization from zero to FedRAMP moderate across a real cloud footprint, and a business unit from zero to CMMC, and we did it all under 9 months. That happened because this team had done it before and moved at the speed the work demanded. Trust, experience, and pace, right when I needed all three. They call it security and compliance made human. Practitioners, not salespeople. In it with you for the long haul, from readiness all the way to authorization. FedRAMP, CMMC, SOC 2, and cloud. Where you go for advice matters. And if you're staring down an audit or an authorization, go to riskpoint.com. That's RISCPOINT.com. Check out the link in the description. So welcome back. Today on Zero Signal, we are speaking with Jacob DePriest, the CISO and CIO for 1Password, the former Deputy Chief Security Officer for GitHub, and who has led various engineering and technology initiatives across multiple organizations. I'm really glad to have you on the show here, man. We're going to dive into it. Thank you for joining us.
I'm so happy to be here. Looking forward to the conversation.
So I have to get my cards on the table.
Okay.
I'm a huge effing fan of 1Password. Like, it is just like I've been using it forever. Like, way back in my before years, I was on a different password manager, and then I grew up one day and I'm like, this is where I need to be. And in the moment of like agentic building and vibe coding and stuff, I just love the integrations you guys have with the command line. So, okay, fanboy over. We'll get into the podcast.
I love it. I mean, that's why I joined the company. Honestly, like I've been a customer since like 2014, and I was like, I just love this place. I want to go work there.
I got my mother-in-law on a password manager, and it was 1Password, and I'm like, we're in for life. Like, we are never.
You can't move at that
That's
point.
it. So yes, tell your marketing team, that's it. All right, mate. So I want to talk around agentic identities and start there, because you've made this really interesting point publicly that I would like you to expand on and give some angles around. And it's this idea that like we keep treating agent identities and we try to have them as the machine identities, but they seem to have these characteristics that are more akin to human identities. And so maybe just kind of take a step back, because that's a counter idea to the non-human identity space that we've seen over the last couple of years. So walk us through, like, when you think about from identities and credential protection for agents, how should we as security leaders be thinking about that? What are the attributes of that? Walk us through that thinking.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, because if you look particularly like at a week like Black Hat here in Vegas, you walk around the floor, you talk to people, and we're all in it deeply all the time, right? And so we tend to think about things in architectures and how things are connected and how we want things to be, but that's often not how things work. Like the users are the ones who drive the actual activities and how things actually operate. And so as the industry was sort of moving to this NHI model, around the same time that we were starting to see more solutions in that space, AI started going wild, right? Like people were using Claude Code, Codex, Cursor all the time. And people were starting to do these things via their agents that had nothing to do with NHI. And these are folks on the finance team, the people team. It's not just engineers on the engineering team. And you're like, well, what about NHI? And they're like, what are you talking about? I'm just trying to get my job done, right? And so I think when we really started looking at the space and said, like, what's our role in this? How can we help our customers? What are we seeing them ask us for? We started thinking, where does it start? And for us, it's always been the human. It's always started with the identities of the humans. We have like I think 1.5 billion credentials in our vaults. Most of them are identities. Most of them are human identities.
20% are mine.
Yeah, there you go. Thank you. And so we kind of started from that principle of like, all right, if the humans are the ones driving this, and we're starting to see this push to use agents to get our jobs done, it's human delegated identity at that point. and this is a challenge right now because now all those agents are connected to things and security teams don't know if it's the human or the agent doing the work. And that's step one. But for us, that really drove kind of our approach and strategy into how we wanted to help. And so that's what led us to investing heavily in privileged access, agentic privilege access. We acquired a company called Epona recently, and that was why. That was very intentional. It wasn't just like, oh, we really like this company, this seems cool. It was very much a, let's start at first principles. Where's identity going? Where's agent identity going? What are the security things that are the most important, and how do we, like, what's the next step for us to help in that space? And that's what led us to privileged access. This what led us to the Epona team, which was already doing this kind of agentic access management.
I think you make a really great point, which is while we're out here, and it reminds me of the episode of Silicon Valley. I don't know if you remember, but like the non-human identity stuff, these incredibly intricate technical challenges, we all think we're great, right? Because we're all sharing it with other people who think with security first principles. And there's the episode of Silicon Valley where they send the pilot out and they're like, oh yeah, they absolutely love the product. And then you explain it to anyone who's actually using it and they're like, yeah, we have no idea what you're talking about. So, and I think that is such a relevant point. And I think the work that you guys are doing, which is like most of the users who use 1Password are not security professionals, right? And your job is to make that seamless. And so I think having that point, which is most people are not really super deep in deploying 15 agents. They're figuring out what their Excel spreadsheet should say, or they're trying to send an email back to a colleague who's pissed them off. Like, it is very basic. And so I think that like dealing with 95% of your user base who are not security professionals versus a lot of the like incredibly almost perfect artistic solution, which is this really good non-human identity perspective, is so useful. So I think you guys are doing great work, and I think that makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, I think we need both to a certain degree.
Agreed.
Like we do have users who are like very technical engineers and they're using our stuff, and that's a persona. But what we're learning, and we're spending a lot of time talking about internally with like our user research team and kind of our design and product team, is that's a slightly different persona than the casual builder.
Yeah.
And now almost our entire company is made up of casual builders.
Yeah.
And I think almost every company is that way. You're starting to see it at home. And so that's why we're really looking at both of those to see like, where can we help? What's the right way to do it? What's a way to do it in a way that's
Totally.
easy to use?
Because a citizen developer, as we've been calling it, like they are fundamentally different than engineers who are building product grade agents.
Yep.
Right. And the identity story that goes with them are different as well.
Yeah.
I'd love to get your reaction to this. I've been thinking about this, and like the framework I've been having in my mind is you either have an agent that's based on delegated access, there's semi-autonomous or autonomous, and like the 3-tier. And depending on where you are in that space is going to be dependent on where your identity management life cycle is going to live. Like we'll pick platforms depending on which one of the three that you're at.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to break it down. I think we think about it in a very similar way. The vast majority of what we see now is the delegated human access. And it could be cloud hosted, it could be locally run. Most are locally run, we've seen. Like we're all talking about like fully autonomous, like it's just running all the time. But most customers, most companies aren't really there yet, although we all sort of know that's where it's going. And so I think trying to solve again for us for the human part first. And that's where we can take principles from things like privileged access, where you've got the human in the loop. And then you have to start to scale that up, because then it's, instead of 5 requests per hour, it's 5 requests per minute or 5 requests per second. And then how do you deal with those things? And that's where kind of the agentic part of it, I think, comes in. But we've eventually got to get to the point where those work in the semi-autonomous and the autonomous space as well.
I'm kind of curious what your counsel or guidance to CISOs who are navigating this space would be. I was reading one of these industry reports. It came from like Salient, and they were saying 92% of CISOs lack full visibility into their AI identities, and 86% of the surveyed CISOs do not apply real guardrails, or they do not enforce access policies on those identities that they do have access on, right? So how do we, as a security community, start to make progress, even if it's not complete, but it's incrementally in the right direction to getting visibility and starting to enforce access policies around those identities?
Yeah, it's funny. I hear those stats, and then part of me is like, yeah, that makes sense. And the other part of me is like, well, what would a normal CISO do about it? I mean, of course, there's like lots of companies who like say that's fully solved, but ultimately it's all changing so fast, and there's new things that are happening every month. I think there's a couple things, like at a very, very practical space. One of the ways I think about this, and I've talked to other CISOs as well who think about it, is is segmentation. If you can't get to the point where everything has the delegated kind of human identity for most of what we're seeing now is fully exposed in either your identity provider, your logs, your SIEM, whatever it is, then at least segment that, right? Like this set of agents is only going to have access to these types of things. And that way you've kind of like limited the blast radius. And if you've got a set of agents that are doing more like business oriented things, you may be giving them access to Notion or Slack or, G Suite, things that are important, but for certain businesses, maybe that's a separate risk profile than production access.
Yeah.
Like really trying to like do kind of this granular approach of at least then you're understanding where your risk is. Then you're understanding like which ones of these are the ones that we need to have higher signal on and are alerting. Where do we need to pay more attention? And then I think as the tools get better and then we are able to do things like to do real-time privileged access guardrails on top of running agents, then I think we'll be able to do a lot more real-time flows into those things. The key, I think, is going to be understanding, particularly in the next 6 months, did a human kick this off on purpose? Or was this an agent they asked to do something else and it was just trying to be helpful?
Yeah.
And I think though that intent of what it's trying to do is going to be really, really important. We've got some capability in that with our privilege access solution, which I'm excited about. It was one of the reasons that led us to this company, Apono. But it's early days across the board everywhere on this. And I think I'm excited to start using this capability inside 1Password.
Yeah.
We're the team is rolling it out very soon. Which
That
is
is a
exciting.
nice thing about being a CISO at a security company product is you get to be customer zero.
Yeah.
You get to explore and dog food it.
Our security team was actually like doing analysis of vendors in this space to try and solve the like privilege access problem while we were doing like acquisition analysis and like diligence at the same time. It was pretty funny.
That is
and we landed on the same answer.
So you also have an interesting role at 1Password, and because you've got two hats that you're wearing, and you've gracefully, might I add, which is both the CISO and the CIO. I'm just kind of curious, do you see this as maybe a directional change that you'll see more security leaders take over a larger remit? And then maybe what does it mean when those two are in conflict? Do you ever have moments where like the CIO on the AI enablement wants to get X done and the CISO is like, well, hold on a second, I got to take a different risk approach here. Like, and then if those two are at conflict, who wins?
Yeah, those are good questions. To start with the first part, I think we're seeing this a lot more. I think a lot of CISOs already have IT as part of their remit. And actually, a CISO friend just took a CIO job, and I was chatting with him last night at dinner, and he's also running the full security team too. And so I think often it's just not reflected in the title, which I think we'll see that change. Either it'll just be assumed that CISOs also run IT, but I think for up to a certain size in most companies, I think it's starting to make more sense because for the AI enablement specifically, being able to manage and balance the risk and the productivity in the speed that we're being asked to do this by our board, the speed we want to do it as leaders in the company to see our companies be successful, I think you have to optimize for that. And so then the question is, how do you make those decisions? How do you go? And I do have that conflict. It's like the little little cricket
Jacob,
on
Jacob
one
and
side,
Hyde.
and yeah, exactly. It's like kind of balancing each other because you're definitely trying to say like, all right, this is a risk we should take for the company because we need to move fast here. But then your security side is like, ooh, is that the right risk? And so I would say my security team probably hears me ask more about productivity and do we really need this? And then the IT team probably hears me say like, hey, we should probably think about this risk here. And so one of the things that's really great about it though, and why I think this is a trend we'll see more is because we're all in the same team together, we have our offsites together, we do our strategic planning together, we're in the same leadership Slack channel together. And so it's small, but as we start to feel like the same team to a certain degree, I think it exposes each side, IT and security, to the incentives for the other one. And I think we can surface those challenges much more quickly and work through them more quickly. And so inside 1Password, we've kind of put together this velocity weighted risk approach is what we call it. And so it's instead of some complicated like spreadsheet with a bunch of risks that are impossible to keep up to date because it's moving so fast, we basically said, here are like our core principles.
Yeah.
You know, the P0 things we're going to avoid are risks that could lead to customer data exposure, you know, something that's really impactful to the company, like these really like things that our customers would never even want us to consider and we would never want to. And then there's a whole set of risks that's like, well, what is this? Like our security brains are normally like, well, that's dangerous. We're like, well, what does that mean? let's talk about it. If we connect, this set of documents to this set of documents, what's the worst that can happen there? And so really trying to understand what that means and scale the risk so that we can move fast.
Yeah, look, I think it makes a ton of sense as well. Like, I think people forget that within organizations, each leader and each team has their own unique culture, right? And if you have a mutual outcome that you drive towards, like you could have a head of finance, head of legal, whatever, and they're gonna drive the outcome what is best for said division. I think if you have security and IT together with a mutually aligned division, like that drives a better outcome versus a CIO whose one goal is to innovate like heck, drive really fast, and what will be versus a security team, which is at the other end of the spectrum and is like secure at all costs. Like, I think you end up with challenges and conflict. And look, I'm sure your team has conflict, but I think if it's done with best course of action, like reasonable conversation, and they actually spend time together, because I know you're a remote first company as well, so they do need to spend this time together. I think the fact that they actually know each other means that, yeah, like we do disagree here, but the overall outcome is X, we're going to compromise here, and this is what's going to happen. And I think it is really easy to forget. You work for a large company, everyone is going to drive towards their own incentives. And if those incentives are together, you're going to get the best outcomes. And then the other thing I would add is, like, it is a nice evolution of CISOs. And I see this a lot, obviously, in the role that I have, which is hiring for CISOs and teams. A, that the combination, but B, 15 years ago when we were the security executive in the corner and the CIO called the shots, like it is a nice come up story. And so for some people, it's be careful what you wish for, because a lot of people wanted this, and it's a lot of stress and a lot of different challenges that some people are not ready for. But people have been crying out for this for a long time. So it's good to see.
I find it super fun, to be honest.
Good.
So it's really now a matter of like, there's not enough time in the day to take all the meetings I actually want to take and spend time where I want to spend. So how do you make sure you have the best team that
just send your
that
agents.
you can just
send your agents to your meetings?
There you go.
Or have a great team.
That's actually a real
great
answer.
team, and we do.
That's how you delegate authority. You push authority down to what decisions are made. Zero Signal is brought to you by Hampton North. I've been responsible for building and turning around cybersecurity programs for companies where a lapse in security just isn't an option. Finance, high tech, AI. Different domains, but the same truth. The programs live and die on talent. And no strategy ships without the right people who share the right DNA. That's why I partner with Hampton North. I've built 3 cybersecurity teams with them, and every time they move faster than anyone else without sacrificing quality. While other agencies are still pushing paperwork, Hampton North already had vetted candidates in front of me. Their executive search is not one size fits all. With one of the largest networks of security leaders in the US, their leadership roles hit the market in days, sometimes hours. And their go-to-market practice covers CROs, CMOs, revenue leaders, and full team build-outs for scaling cybersecurity businesses. They meet every candidate, they reference every story. If you're ready to build and scale and grow your security program, go to hamptonnorth.com and see why brands like Clear, Instacart, Airtable, and OpenAI trust Hampton North to build great teams. Check out the link in the description. I'm curious, you touched on something I want you to circle back on, which was that framework-driven decision-making when it comes to risk. Could you expand on that? Because I think I've seen you publicly talk about also how at 1Password, there's very much a like explore first, analyze second. Maybe that's my language, kind of culture where you're letting teams use their agents and explore with AI technologies and kind of like safer ways. And then they get to the other, and then they say, okay, if we're moving it to production, moving it to, then we do the security root analysis, which is completely reverse than most teams. Usually there's this huge gate up front, which is like, thou shalt clear all of these security hurdles. Then you get to have the experimentation on the other side.
And I think that's how we've been. I think that's how most companies are. And it's amazing. 1Password's always had this culture of privacy first, security first. Like we have a lot of cryptography experts in the company and privacy experts in the company. I love that. I think it's what makes us special. At the same time, we can't apply the same rubric to every decision in the entire company because the risk isn't the same. Like we start talking about the risk of messing with production where vault data is stored. That's like a P0 critical, like that's a sacred area where the bar is really, really high. But we're talking about experimenting with new agents and it's over on test data. It's not anywhere close to production. Maybe it's just company data like, hey, are we going to try this thing out with documents? Are we going to try this this new agent framework out and hook it up to something that's lower risk. Like for us, some of the internal company data, like where it's not as high risk for us, like hooking up to Notion, for instance. And so what we've tried to do then is adjust our experimentation gates to accommodate that. And so if somebody's trying to bring in a new vendor, do some experimentation with a partner, hey, let's get them up and running as fast as we can. There's some core things we got to meet.
Yep.
Like there's some things we're not going to compromise on, but let's not try and hold them to the same bar as the highest risk elements of the company if they're not even going to be touching that.
Yeah.
And so that's enabled us to try a few things out more quickly. We're still working on like, is that a separate path that we want to enable all the time, or is it just a different set of questions we ask? So it's not perfect yet, but it's helped us move quickly. And in some cases, it's helped us really bring in some like early stage startup AI partners for parts of the business where we're willing to take a little more risk and move really quickly. And it's enabled the business. It's worked out.
And nothing is going to be perfect, but if you set those intentions with good baseline rules, like I think that's a really healthy thing to do versus, hey, we're going to go through these impossible tasks to onboard something that is just so low risk. And again, like in startups, you guys are not startup. You're you're an enterprise company, right? So I see that in startups, it's a little bit easier, and that's how they come and play catch up.
Yeah.
Right? Because they can go faster. So I think it's refreshing to hear that CISO and a CIO of a large corporate enterprise is leaning with that innovation with reasonable guardrails.
The key thing we're trying to do now is codify that in kind of the company brain or the context so that we can actually have agents make some of those assessments for us. So get that risk profile down into things like markdown files, into code, so that we can start to automate things like third-party risk. And if somebody's got a question in Slack, they get an answer without having to have kind of a human involved in every part. And so that's sort of the journey we're on now, which has been fun.
I love that principle-based way of having a decision framework and then being able to get democratize that across everyone in your company, and then they can decentralize it across all their agents, because then at least you get everyone thinking along the same path.
Yeah.
And then you can change it as the company changes, right? And then you could just update the doc and push it out.
Yep.
Update new. So let's also, something else I was kind of curious, I want to get your perspective on is passwordless. Boy, there was like a moment there where like the world was just going to get rid of passwords, and then that didn't really happen. Like passwordless definitely had like, whether it's magic links or whether or there's kind of these other expressions of passwordless. I'm kind of curious, where do you see that particular trend happening inside the enterprise identity authentication story? And is there an intersection between passwordless and agents coming up, or as really the move towards agents like kind of the sunset that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, certainly passkeys are a step up in security over username and password, and we're very excited about those still, years into this. At the same time, it's also this funny thing where as agents have come out and like things like Codex and Claude Code and Cursor, we've seen this big push back to the laptop for most enterprises for lots of things, right? Like the things that are happening on employees' laptops now would freak out a CISO from like 3 years ago. You're like, what do you mean you're connecting all this stuff down? You're downloading all this data and it's processing it locally.
And just the continuity risk. Like one guy's laptop goes, like where are all those skills? Where are all those decisions? Where's all that context gone?
Yeah, exactly.
Poof.
And so if you'd said this was going to be the case, I don't think anybody would have believed it 3 years ago, is we've been moving everything out. We've been pushing it to the cloud. Like the laptops were just sort of the dummy device at the end. But as a result of that, it's actually meant a bunch more credentials are now showing up on disk again at the endpoint. And so it's not just passwords, it's environment variables that the agents need to be able to connect to things. It's API keys, it's session keys, it's all these things that are required to work agentically now. And so I think what it's shown is that whether it's password or not, it's the idea that vaulted credentials are more important than ever. And how we figure out the relationship between the vault and the agents is really, really important. And so we've spent a lot of time thinking about this. We've released some kind of principles that we adhere to as we're looking at all these integrations. And one of those principles is, at least on our side, we do everything to keep the credentials out of the LLM context, whatever it is. And so we released a partnership integration with Claude, 1Password for Claude, a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
And one of the cool things about that is it'll drive the browser, and the browser extensions actually end up talking to each other. And when Claude needs to log into Amazon or log into your bank or, submit your receipts for your work trip or whatever it is, it knows enough to negotiate that with the 1Password extension, but then it actually hands over control to the 1Password extension to do the filling. And that way it's not handing those passwords into, or the credential or whatever it is, into the LLM context. And then once it's done, Claude picks back up and keeps running with it. And so it's just an example, but that's also informing how we're thinking about enterprise integrations, the Vault relationships we have, like our Codex extension works very similarly. And so I think, for us, it's really about this credential layer that I think is going to move to, there's going to be an OAuth story in there. There's going to be non-passwords in there as well, but it's really that interaction that's, I think, important going forward.
Now, I'm really excited about this release you guys just did, and also the ability that when you do that plugin for the first time, it hoovers up all the engineers who've just been saving API keys to disk, just hoovering them up and just shoving them back in 1Password. It's like, cool, we can deal with the rotation later, but like just getting keys do not live on disk. The amount of times I have said that in the last 3 months is like, they're like, what about this? I'm like, credentials don't live on disk. Never. It just doesn't happen.
Yeah, we released a lot more capability on that this week as part of the 1Password client. So it's going to get better and better.
So in this world that we're navigating as security leaders, there's change happening on every level, including we are still trying to, as security leaders, handle the fallout or the next set of evolution of the Mythos moment that we had all those months ago. And
we're still having.
We're still having. There's daily things happening. And there's always this question around now that we have these agents and these harnesses with these agents that are getting very, very good at finding vulnerabilities in software, there's what's our response as a security community going to be this? And so I get asked by CISOs all the time whether, how do we handle patching in the cloud environment, and how do we handle protecting our applications when you've got models that are just aggressively finding vulnerabilities and starting exploitation on this? Your security, so the response of the industry has been okay, if we need something that can find vulnerabilities, we're going to need to use AI to create patches for these vulnerabilities too. And I'm very bullish on the direction that we're going in. I think this is the direction. But your security research team has put out some really interesting, let's call it grounding data on where we are in this journey. Can you speak to some of the content that the research that the team is coming out, the research that Keith Hoodlet who's a former guest, two-time guest on this podcast. So we're a big fan of Keith. So could you just kind of tease us and tell us what are the key takeaways from this research that your team has been doing?
We have a new research team at 1Password called Off by One,
which I have the stickers for now.
Amazing. I don't even have the stickers yet.
I know, I got it first.
No.
Wow.
That's it.
Oh, wow.
Take it up with Keith.
Yeah.
And, they set out to look at this question that you've posed, all right, clearly the natural next step of if all these models are finding all these vulnerabilities, clearly we need to go patch them. How's that working? Is that doing what we think it's doing? And so I'm not going to do the research justice, but they set up a set of test runs and harnesses using multiple frontier models to try and do this across a set of vulnerabilities that were recent, had already been patched, but were so recent that they wouldn't be in the model training. So this was really trying to understand the generative part of models. Could they go patch something they hadn't really seen before? And what the results showed us was that it doesn't actually create a true fix for the vulnerability as much as we would like as security professionals. And so a little bit less than half the time, it actually will give a fix, and even parts of those fixes, the way it fixed it was actually altering the behavior of the application slightly. And the rest of the time, it either didn't fix it, introduced a new bug on top of it, or said it fixed it and kind of made it worse. And so, this was essentially with some pretty standard kind of prompting around it. And they did a rigorous job, looking at the different prompts, the different scenarios. But the results are really interesting because it's not as straightforward as, well, the models are great at finding all this stuff, and now we're just going to go send them to fix the problems that they found, because the fixes just aren't as robust as we would like them to be, which is a little eye-opening.
Yeah, it's contrarian, right? Because you go onto the floor and everyone will tell you a completely different story. Yeah. So it'd be interesting. I think the research is this week. It's dropped.
Research is coming out this week, and then that's probably after or before this podcast is released.
So everyone who's listening to this will be able to go head over to 1password.com/research, and they'll be able to land on the page.
You know what we'll do is we'll drop it in the comments.
Yes, we will put it in the description. There you go. Because I think what's really important is what you mentioned there is we start to think about What I appreciate about good research teams is they ground us in reality. And that's frustrating as reality is. It
Yeah.
is good to have someone who's going to hold your feet to the ground and be like, this is where we are, because it allows us as an industry to respond and say, okay, if we are actually here and we can prove that we're here, then we can go get better.
Yeah.
But if we're headed in the clouds and we keep just letting, God love the marketing teams, but let the marketing teams drive the narrative of like where we think we are, like
Yeah.
we are not actually going to do ourselves justice by moving.
Yeah, I mean, you can't go fix the problem if you don't identify the problem, right? And so I think that's what's really important here, and that's we shared the research ahead of time with the Frontier Labs, and we've gotten some feedback already, some of which I think will be included as we share it out. And I think that's the important next step is like, where do we go from here? That's what we're already focused on is like, what does this mean for us if we can't just trust the models to go get a patch? If it's less than half the time it's fixing it, and even less than that, it's actually doing what we really wanted it to do effectively.
Yeah.
The numbers tell us we have to do better. And so we think a lot of that is going to end up being just improved by the models themselves, by the Frontier Labs. They're innovating, they're making this better all the time. So I think that's naturally going to get better.
Yeah.
But I think from a company perspective too, this is where things like harnesses come into play in company context. And so we have an effort inside the product security team where we've released 2 blogs. A third one's coming called Sage, and it's the security analysis guidance engine that we've built. And it's our security harness. So it's learning from all the past decisions that our security team has made. It's learning from our context of the code we have. It's very grounded in the 1Password code base to try and identify and find fixes for the code that we are seeing. And mostly right now it's looking for vulnerabilities. It's looking to find things and to bring the human in. But ultimately, that training and that context is part of what we think the answer is going to be here and the way forward. But there's probably a lot more to it than that.
You kind of attested this a little bit. So right now we're not fit for purpose. If we have LLMs, we find the vulnerabilities, but they're not positioned to fix it for us yet. It sounds like at 1Password, you're having your own product security team handle that, at least until the major LLMs. Like, who do you think is ultimately responsible for this today? Is it CISOs? Is there an opportunity for third-party vendors to come in and plug a gap here? Or do you think it is on the Anthropic's, OpenAI's to fix this?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of all three.
Yeah.
To be honest, because I think the labs and the core models they're just going to keep getting better, and certainly they want to continue to improve. And their security teams and product teams are great.
Yeah.
We talk to them regularly. But at the same time, like CISOs have to understand what reality is.
Yeah.
And so as part of the research, the team is releasing the full harness and software and test results and everything. So you can actually replicate it. And so it's allowing teams and CISOs to be able to run it internally. But a lot of that is really understanding where you're at. And so I think CISOs also have to be responsible, and that may be bringing in vendors to help them out. It may be building their own things internally like we're building. It may be a combo. But as soon as this gets better, there's going to be a new set of problems that we're going to have to be challenged with. And so I think this really speaks to security teams needing to kind of build some of that skill for themselves so that they can be kind of thoughtful partners in how this is evolving for their companies.
That's a really good point about internal security teams getting grounded in the research and then like training ourselves on how to handle this. I mean, and just to restate that 4-part framework, 'cause I think it's so important. It's like the research team was looking at, and you correct me where I go wrong here, does it actually solve does the AI system harness create a patch that's durable? Does it create a patch that is brittle, meaning you can get around it if you kind of do a bit of fuzzing? Or tier 3, does it create a patch kind of fix, but actually just breaks the application? Or patch 4, category 4, does it think it's patching, but actually introduces new vulnerabilities? And if my memory serves correctly, there's something you said less than half. If you look at the first 2 categories where you have a patch or a brittle patch, that's something like 43% of patches fit in those 2 categories. And then patches that are like durable, if I'm remembering correctly, are like 17%.
It's low. It's lower than we would like it to be.
Yes,
like
that's
as security
the answer.
professionals.
17% is so perfect while we're in Vegas because it's one roll of the dice.
There you go.
There we got. Die is the official terminology. My English teacher will find this somewhere and come after me. So look, I think what's really interesting today is, look, we've talked a lot about AI, but you revert back to your team a lot, and these are human beings, right? And I think that's refreshing, truthfully. And I think as we look at the future security program, like I know you have a growing organization, the team is growing, you have great people in it. Like, what do you think the security team looks like in 3 years from now?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, it's hard to predict anything in 3 years. I'd
Yeah,
say like
right.
what I think most security teams are evolving into today is working on the builder mindset. And I think a
Yep.
lot of teams across many companies are doing this as well, but I think it's really important for security teams and IT teams. But we can't just plug in the vendor solution a lot of the times. Like
Yeah.
even some of the newer vendor solutions that are AI based require an understanding of how it works. It requires an understanding of curating the data. Okay, maybe this new tool like looked at all these things and created a new detection as code for you. But having an engineer who's got a security mind, or a security person who's got an engineering mind, be able to look at that and say, this is how it works. This is how harness should look. This is how it should be updated. This is how we should train the context. Like those things are becoming more and more important, I think. The other thing we talk a lot about is how much faster it is to solve certain problems. Like, can we just spin up an agent to go solve this versus spend 3 to 4 months looking for a vendor? And so I think the build versus buy equation is changing, which is changing what security teams need to do. And so the evolution of our team internally has been very much moving to this builder mindset, not to replace our engineers. Like that's the core of our team. Like that's what makes our security team great, I think. It's to augment them. It's to scale them. Like if we've got somebody who's an expert in this one area, I'm thrilled. I don't want them to go away. I just want them to take these technologies and figure out how to scale what they're doing to help more engineering teams, for instance, inside the company.
Nice.
Awesome. So Jake, as we start to wrap up here for today's conversation, what is the counsel you're going to give to a security leader who might be leaving Black Hat? They're going to say, okay, tomorrow's a new day. I'm like going to make some changes going into my program and we're going to make some improvements. They're just listening as pod. What's some counsel you would give them? Where would they start? Because we covered a lot of things here, from agentic identities to where we are with patch remediation and such. How do we as security leaders just make some incremental progress to meeting some of the systemic risks that we are trying to mitigate?
Yeah, I think I'll give the engineering answer if it depends on
That's fair.
where a program is at. But I think it also really comes down to what you said. It's just incremental progress. Take that next step. I think it's often daunting, particularly with teams as they're looking at this landscape. They come to a place like Black Hat and they're like, oh my goodness, there's so many vendors, there's so many solutions. Should I build versus buy? We can often get overwhelmed by just the magnitude of like, all right, I think I'm supposed to go build agents, and I think I know how to build roughly the harness. I need 6 months to design it correctly, bring some engineers in, maybe hire somebody to go figure this out. No, spin up something this weekend. Take 4 hours on a Monday morning, pull up Claude, pull up Codex, see how far you can get. And it doesn't have to be perfect. And so often that learning, that iteration, that process is what leads somebody to having a more formed opinion about what's next. And so that could be a GRC person, it could be a privacy person, it could be somebody in the SOC, it could be somebody in product security. And I think those iterations, those learnings really inform where teams need to go next. And I think it's one of the situations you just have to start. You just have to start.
I would say like a lot of leaders, from a discipline perspective, they're always very busy, right? Every executive is busy, but I think if you can plug out, to your point, like 4 hours of focus time where, let's say you're not as up to date in this technology, like having the discipline to do that is just going to take you so much further forward. But every executive looks at their calendar and tries to find 4 hours, and it's not easy.
This is why I spend some of my weekends just playing with Claude and Codex and just iterating as much as I can. Sometimes I'll have them go at the same time and
well, if they are looking for good reading, we know some good research that they should be looking at.
Exactly.
There we go.
Also, with that, Jacob, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it. Jacob is the CIO and CISO for 1Password and the former Deputy CSO for GitHub. Thank you for coming on today.
Thanks for having me. It was a blast.
Thanks for coming on. If today's conversation gave you something useful, a framework, a question worth sitting with, a way to position something you're already dealing with, that's the point. Connect with Conor and I on LinkedIn. The links are in the show notes. Tell us what landed.
And if you know another security leader who's navigating the same pressure, text them this episode. We'll see you next time.
Resonate.